Okay, Erica, talk about the state of pedagogy and online communities and what the hell.
Well, Al, number one, this is such an intimidating question. And I guess I've been thinking a lot about this, obviously, given the line of work that I'm in. One of the wonderful things about a terrible moment is that I feel as though a lot of people are thinking very seriously about their pedagogy who never have before. And that's a really wonderful thing. And I think that at least for me, I've been thinking a lot about how much I've learned from ModPo. The shift to online learning in an emergency is very different from planning an online course to deliver it from the beginning online. So, this semester, when I personally had to move remotely, I think that we had like literally maybe a weekend at the most before we went online. And then I was helping my colleagues figure out how to do the same thing. And I found that I was really looking at the structure of how ModPo is organized as a way to organize my course because I was very worried about the community building element. And I didn't have the time or headspace to think about things that are more specific to like instructional design. And there are things that ModPo does that I have not been able to pull off in my tiny 12-person class. So I've been thinking a lot about what that is. And I think the biggest one is how community happens. And I think it was Amaris who talked about finding community in imaginative spaces. And how I think that there's some kind of correlation between the reading and thinking about poetry and community that happens in ModPo, coupled with the structure of the course, and that we know that we have webcasts, we know there are office hours, each week has a similar rhythm to it. So there's a structure in place, and then you have the sort of freedom to let the poems direct you. So I don't feel like I really want to say much more than that because I feel like my colleagues probably have a whole lot to say too. I
Mm,
guess I would just end with questions around like what is it about the teaching of poetry that works particularly well in this context, and what can what are the benefits of so many people thinking about this at once that we might be able to tap into.
yeah. And then that last comment, you didn't use the word crowdsourcing because it's kind of a demeaning word, but that's sort of what you meant. That is
Yeah.
to say, the assumption that lots and lots of people of goodwill, we want to exclude people who are just crashing online spaces or not interested in community. But assuming goodwill, if you can get people together, don't give them too tight a focus, but give them some focus, they will
Mhm.
do miraculous things intellectually together. I think that's a very positive assumption. It's not naive. So, Amber Rose, any thoughts about this? I mean, your dream, your wish for your own career is to be in a classroom in the space with other people and share it. And assuming all goes well in the world, you'll be able to do that. But you've also had this experience of, we all, when Ton called, we were all like, oh, we know that person. That's a friend, even though we've not met Ton and it seems unlikely that we will. So, Ambrose, take it anywhere at all, and then I'll ask Davey to comment.
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts about this because I was also teaching my own class, my first time teaching my own class this semester of 8 people. And it was a little different because we did have half of a semester where we were in person. And I found myself so relying on those foundations that we built to be able to kind of carry the feeling of intimacy throughout the remainder of the semester. But when Erica was talking about trying to pinpoint, specific things about ModPo that make it successful, there are two things that jump out at me that maybe might seem sort of secondary to kind of how one would think about pedagogy, but I'm realizing are really important. And the first is not being afraid of being derailed, which I think is something that is really important in ModPo.
Yeah.
We often find ourselves derailed, but sometimes that's where it goes. And if the energy is in that place, it's better for the conversation to kind of let it flow there rather than trying to retrace and bring it back to like whatever you had on your agenda for the day. Um, and sometimes that derailing ends up being very personal. So, like, I'm thinking about part of the reason why I had this response to Tan specifically was because we had this really important moment when we were able to witness Tan talking about the importance of people using their pronouns correctly. And we had a whole moment, right, around that. That was not about poetry, but that really was about Tan's person and what it means
Right.
to witness and to be witnessed.
Right.
And so making room for like really personal kind of check-ins, because I think there's something that happens in the classroom where we leave a lot of maybe our like personal self at the
Yeah.
door. But when you're in
Yeah.
your home, if you're in your feelings, your kitchen doesn't change when you open your Zoom, right? So meeting people where they're at and being willing to be derailed or be more personal than you would in like a traditional classroom. So that's one thing.
Yeah.
The second thing, um, I
Can I ask you to
forgot.
pause
Oh,
there while you think of the second thing? Just pause.
okay, yes.
Gabe, I know Gabe has to go, so I want to invite Gabe to, in response, after your second thing, I want to just ask Gabe if he wants to quickly respond to this topic and then do a final thought because he's got to go. Amber, can you stay until she's done for a second, Gabe?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Sorry,
Okay.
Amber, go ahead.
Yeah, very quickly. My second thought was, and this is specific to teaching poetry, is not being afraid to kind of drill down into a very small section, or into a very small point, right? Which I think close reading a poem really lends itself to kind of landing on one line. And even if you don't talk about the rest of the poem, but if you have a great discussion about those 3 words, you
Yes.
can learn so much and it can be so
Yes.
rich.
Yes.
Whereas a regular classroom, maybe you're trying to cover 10 different points.
Yes. Yes.
But in ModPo, I think we really value that it's not about walking away with a full understanding of the poem, but it's about gaining the skills of being able to
Right.
read really tight and close.
Wow.
And I think those things are really conducive for online teaching.
Super important point. And I just want to say one thing. Down with coverage, down with the idea of coverage. And by the way, you don't have to get rid of your coverage fetish by just going online. You could actually get rid of your coverage fetish in the classroom, but we haven't for a bunch of complicated reasons. And a lot of it has to do with testing and assessment. We don't do any testing or assessment in ModPo. And so what the hell if we spend, most of a webcast talking about the line of a poem? Nobody's going to say, yeah, but we didn't cover all the, and I think we need to stop that. And I think online teaching can get us back into the classroom and not worry so much about coverage. Gabe, a quick thought on either online community and pedagogy and or final thought before you have to go.
Yeah, absolutely. So as some of you know, but as I'm sure most of the audience doesn't know, other than TAing, I also am like a student in classes as I'm a grad student. And so like I am experiencing classes over Zoom with a lot of people. And basically, what I've noticed so far is that it's very hard to have spontaneous successes right now, but it's very easy to have spontaneous failures or hiccups or mess ups or something like that. And so my approach has always been to just bring in as much equipment as you can. And like we're actually really good at the spontaneous tech stuff, which like that's mostly because Zach and Chris are really good at their jobs. But also there's so much so much work that we sort of put in the background, like so much email discussions that happen amongst us. Al's notes, as I've seen them live, have like everybody's name and a queue of speaking and everything. So there's so much planning and so much equipment there. And I think like something that's important to remember is basically, as Amber Rose was saying, forgiveness and a bit of empathy with everybody's situations, but also trying to like come with a little bit of I think to show up in a way that isn't necessarily demanding something of yourself, like oh, I have to meet this goal, or I have to do this, but saying like, I'm going to choose to put in some of my limited effort here because I'm about to meet other people where they're at, and I'm going to let them show up as they are, but I'm going to try to give something of myself here. And I think that's actually really refreshing and helpful to oneself. The last thing I wanted to say before I head out is what was it? Oh my God. The last thing I wanted to say before I head out is basically that I think what a lot of us are feeling is the kind of like ongoing presentness that we're in. This almost like the fact that there doesn't seem to be a steady or understandable future. A lot of our plans have evaporated before our eyes. And I think something that teaching and learning together, poetry or otherwise, does is it kind of gives you a little bit of a shape to occasion your day, to occasion your like week, to give you these kind of goals that move you through the present without just feeling like everything is just, oh my God, it's just plummeting on me. What's happening? Nothing is happening, but everything's happening. I'm in crisis, but I'm bored, you know? Like, so I think these kinds of acts of teaching and meeting together do something to interrupt that stream a little bit and make everything just a little bit more sensible.
Yeah.
That's all.
You have a really great attitude about this, Gabe.
Thank
I want to ask Davy and Anna to think about whatever they were about to say and make it minuscule, just a little point, so that we can get to final words and, get going. So Davy, a quick thought on this whole topic. It's a big one, I know.
My quick thought is this. So in my life outside of ModPo, one of the things I do is teach in the urban studies program at Penn. And the conversations that we've been having among the lecturers in that program are about how do we teach about out there when we're in here? How do we deal with a pandemic when we're teaching about the city? And that's a binary that ModPo is uninterested in. That I think that for me, ModPo works because it thinks that material life is in its representation, that its representation isn't separate from the physical world, but part of how it's constituted. And that kind of the poem as the vehicle for talking about lived experience rather than as a thing wholly separate from lived experience is what allows us to, like, the way Amber Rose was saying, like, bring our kitchen into the like remote room with one another, that like everyone gets to bring their materiality, and it's the bringing of the materiality that is the shared experience. And that's a thing that it's been interesting to watch colleagues of mine in many different contexts figure out how to do, that ModPo does such a generous job of letting everyone's materiality be part of how we experience our remoteness together.
Beautifully said. Thank you, Davy. Anna, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, Davey, couldn't agree more. Something that was really driven home for me as Lily and I moved our in-person class, Writers House Fellows, to being a virtual experience, is that one of the most important things that I think we had to do, and I really like want to shout out to Lily for this because she was like instrumental in making sure that we all did this, is really just checking in with students as humans before we checked in with them as intellectual participants, and making sure that they knew that we cared as much about their well-being as humans as we did about their well-being as intellectual participants, like in the like material of the course. So I think kind of constantly sort of foregrounding our caring about our students as humans, how they're doing, what they need, what we can do to help and support and guide them.
Yeah.
As much as we care about doing the sort of delivery process of making sure that they're getting the class that they signed up to take, as much as is possible, is really important.
Yeah, when you talk like that, I just feel genuinely so lucky that I'm surrounded by you all, that, that you guys are so good at this, and you've gotten so good at this. We're really like, experts is the wrong word. I hate the word expert in this context, but we're really good at what we do. And we all assume that the first thing that's going to motivate someone is they're feeling okay about making the commitment. Yajir is a great example, right? Joined us, presumably accidentally, found the course. Only in week 2 has already explored ModPo Plus and came to this now 95-minute discussion because he wanted to see that we were real. He wanted to see what we looked like now. And that has nothing to do with the poetry, but that's the motivator. That got him here. And after that, he got to be part of, pretty heady discussion. That's the prime motivation. That's what you were just saying about you and Lily, like in Fellows, is saying, okay, how are you doing? Tell us about your life. Gabe was saying, and somebody on Twitter just commented on it, that we're in crisis, but we're bored. Somehow both of those things, right? And there's a lot of people in crisis. So we're not talking so much in crisis terms. We're talking about poetry, and we're saying hello to people who are calling in from afar, and we're treating people like human beings. And that's in effect, because this crisis is so full of boredom, that's in effect a dealing with the crisis, as opposed to the hair on fire way of dealing with the crisis, which is, what pretty much all our leaders, that's their approach.